A dense blanket of clouds blocked the view of the morning sun. Outside the barricaded door of the fortress, Ben stared up at the sky, his ears pulled back as he sensed an oncoming storm. The sounds of approaching hooves alerted him to Avery as she walked toward him on the stone floor inside the building. "Avery," he gently called back to her. "What's up?" The mama goat tugged at a cowl slung over her shoulders. "Not much, other than those clouds." Ben turned his attention back to the sky. "Yeah, it looks like a big storm coming this morning." Avery shuddered and leaned against the stone doorframe. "At least there are no ghouls about." "Don't jinx us now," Ben chuckled. "Things have been quiet around here." Avery stared blankly out into the courtyard. "Ben, do you think things will ever go back to normal?" Ben lowered his head. After what Umpty explained to him about the ghouls, about the people they used to be, he hadn't held on to much hope of normalcy returning. "I don't know." He walked closer to her, wishing he could comfort her somehow. She wrapped her arms around herself as a gust of wind blew by and glanced at the sky. "Yeah, it's probably going to rain," she said, trying to change the topic. "Oh, definitely." He forced a weak smile. "For quite a while, too." A low rumble echoed from above. "And it's going to be fierce. We should head back inside. The others are probably wondering where we are." Avery turned around and walked away. "Besides, Red has been looking for you, Ben." "I'll be right down." He glanced outside once more, just in time to see the first few drops of rain fall. Back in the tunnels, Ben took a lantern that hung from a hook beside the staircase and lit it. He trudged through the cold tunnels until a familiar and inviting smell hit his nose. Ernest must have been cooking the fish Blick caught earlier that day. He followed the savoury aroma to the barracks mess hall, where everyone gathered around a large table. Red immediately saw him and ran over. "Ben!" she called out as she leapt into his embrace. Everyone looked their way. "Ben, did Red just—" Marge stuttered, an excited smile pulling at her lips. Ben couldn't believe it either. Red had spoken, and everyone heard it. Ever since seeing the traumatic event of her grandmother's death, Red hadn't said a word. Hearing her voice was formidable proof that she was healing. Avery knelt down to Red with a smile, but the child buried her face in the fur of Ben's chest as he picked her up. "I guess she's still most comfortable around me," Ben gloated. "Isn't that right, kiddo?" Red nodded shyly. She was much more energetic than she used to be, but only for Ben. Ben lowered her hood and stroked her chestnut hair, acting almost on instinct to soothe her. He carried her back to the table and sat her down next to him. At his other side, Blick chuckled. "Ha! You'd think you were her family for years the way you're acting now." The wolf rolled his eyes with a smile. He didn't care what anyone said about him and Red. The kid was healing, and she made him feel needed, which warmed his heart. The smell of freshly cooked fish wafted into the room as Ernest came over with several plates of fried trout balanced across his long, crooked arms. He slid the plates down in front of everyone and set one more for himself. The serving of fish wasn't a lot, but it was better than a few scraps of berries and mushrooms. Not much, just a simple dish, but enough to fill a hungry stomach. "Someone's going to have to gather more food relatively soon," Ben commented, sawing into the meat with a blunt knife. "Bah," Blick grunted, "and after all the trouble I went through catching these fish in the river?" "I agree with Benjamin," Ernest piped up, pausing between bites. "The river beside us is decent, and your efforts are admirable, Blick. But it's never going to be enough to feed all of us." Blick looked down at the cooked meat on his own plate, then at everyone else. Fair." He jammed his fork into the fish and tore into it with his teeth. Ben bit the trout off his fork, near masterful in its preparation. Despite not having magic, other than his curse, Ernest was a wizard in the kitchen. After the meal, Ben went back to the entrance. As he'd predicted, rain had started pouring down. The noise was like a raging river cascading from the heavens with the occasional rumbling of thunder. Little footsteps sounded on the stone floor behind him as Red tried, with little success, to sneak up. "I can hear you, kiddo," Ben called back with a smile. He turned around to look into the hall and saw Red's cloak hanging out from behind a smashed shelf. "And see you too. Come over here." Red peeked out from her hiding spot before running over to him. "Did you miss me already?" He knelt down to address her. Red just stepped around to stand beside him, not saying a word. Nothing? Not even another excited "Ben?" She giggled a little as she grabbed his tail to hug. Hearing her laugh pulled a smile out of Ben's lips. Just yesterday, Red was just nodding her head yes and no, and a few days before, she was sitting silently on Ernest's couch, absent-mindedly playing with an old doll. He stood up and laid his hand on Red's head. Thunder rumbled overhead, and she pulled closer to him, making him chuckle. "Not a fan of thunder, huh?" Red held to him tighter, shaking her head. "Let's go back inside then," Ben whispered as he reached down to pick Red up. He turned back to the staircase leading down and started walking. Back in the bunker, Ben overheard the sounds of commotion. An argument. He rushed over to find Blick and Umpty shouting at each other, with Marge holding the raging dwarf back. "What is going on in here?" Ben shouted out, holding Red's head over his shoulder. "This bleeding fool nearly took one of me fingers off," Blick bellowed. "Look, his knife is still stuck in the table where it nearly hit me." As Blick claimed, a knife was sticking up from the table right in front of where Blick had been sitting. "It was an accident for the last time," Umpty retorted, reaching to recover the utensil. "I set my mug down on a spoon that my knife was laying on just a bit too hard, and the knife got catapulted." "Bollocks!" Blick hollered. "If I hadn't moved my hand right then to grab my own drink, it'd be nailed to the table." He struggled against Marge's grip. "How do you accidentally set your knife on a spoon that has no business being set the wrong way round?" "That's enough," Ben howled, shaking the air. "If you two can't stop causing trouble for us, I'll throw one of you into the river myself." "Bah! I'd like to see you try, lad. Even a wolf like yourself would have issue lifting a sturdy dwarf such as I." Blick?" Avery stepped forward. "He doesn't have to. Ben can just huff, puff, and blow you away. Literally. I've seen him do that to throw his father into the river, and he was nearly 3 times your size." "Eh?" Blick stopped struggling, now trying to grasp what he was hearing. "What, you mean with his breath?" Avery glanced at Ben before nodding. "I've blown over houses with just a breath, Blick," Ben growled. "Unless you want a demonstration, I suggest you calm down and accept his apology." "Hey, the guardsman started it. His knife? That was an accident, right?" Ben sneered at Umpty. Umpty, not changing his attitude, straightened his shoulders. "Yes, Benjamin, it was an accident. And I'll see to it that it doesn't happen again." His tone remained cool and level. Ben returned his stern gaze to Blick. "There. Now are you going to stop acting so wild?" Blick huffed. "Hard not to when the knife nearly hit me hand, but fine. Just make sure he keeps his distance from me." Satisfied, Ben pulled Red away from his shoulder. Stress and fear filled her face, and tears welled in her eyes. The strain of the situation at hand clearly affected her. He turned around and left the room. Holding Red close to him, he spoke softly. "Hey, there's no need to be scared, kiddo. Those two just don't get along." Red pulled herself closer to Ben. He sighed and set her down to stand on her own while he knelt down. "Red, I've been keeping you safe since I found you back in the dark forest. I will not let anything happen to you, whether it be ghouls or some conflict between the survivors." Red stepped closer to him and wrapped her arms around him in a childish hug. "Ben..." Her voice came soft and small. He picked her up again. A sense of sad pride kindled a spark in his heart. He was needed. He was responsible. Finally, he felt like he had positive worth in the world. That's all he ever wanted.